Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome. Wrestling with Whiskey is back once again. Cheers, everybody. Today is another very special show. I've been lucky enough to have a couple of awesome guests on to this live version of the show so far. The bourbon show, but not just bourbon, it's the whiskey show for the 21st century here live every single Wednesday. I appreciate you guys jumping in here as always. And tonight, like I said, another one of my friends from the whiskey world, an example of whiskey and wrestling combining. We have the Canadian National Brand Ambassador for Ardbeg. So this is whiskey without the E this week, ladies and gentlemen. And I know there are several of our people who come in and watch who are, that's where they come from. You know, a lot of my Instagram people and everything come from that bourbon world that we know, the bourbon and rye over here. But man, I know there's a lot of you UK people, a lot of you European, Asia people who you're more into this stuff. You guys are all about this, the malt. You are all about that Scotch, as the brothers might say. But I've got him waiting on the other scene, the other side of this whole deal. So without further ado, let's not keep him waiting. Ladies and gentlemen, let's head over to the interview corner. So here we are, everybody. Please welcome the Canadian National Brand Ambassador for Ardbeg and Glenmorangie, Bryan Simpson. Bryan, thank you so much for being here on Wrestling with Whiskey Weekly.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is something obviously I wanted to do for a long time. It's a great honor to be on here. It's also good to see your face. It's been so long since I've actually seen you in person.
Right? No, so I was trying to think, was the last time, was it SummerSlam of last year?
Yeah, so you had to come up for SummerSlam in Toronto, and I think we got you the day before that you may have been working,
Yeah.
and we had a fantastic night going around some of the amazing cocktail bars in Toronto.
Yeah, no, I mean, I knew obviously Toronto is it's an incredible international city and everything like that. People know that, but yeah, like it was so cool to see like the cocktail scene and the bar scene there that's really very, very kind of established and seemingly growing and everything there.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm really, really fortunate. When I moved here to Toronto, I first moved here 10 years ago. Obviously not from there by the accent for anyone watching, and this is not your traditional Toronto accent.
What? Is that not the Canadian? This is news to me.
But it has changed a little bit. When I first came over here 10 years ago, no one understood me, and now only a few people understand me. Maybe not everyone, but it's cool to see the city's changed so much in terms of the 10 years that I've been back and forth from Toronto back home to Scotland. And the cocktail part of it is something that I've got into kind of relatively recently. And so many of these cocktail bars in Toronto, they're built out of passion. It's not necessarily there to be a great money maker. So everything they're making is through passion. But that was an amazing night. I really remember us being treated to some of the amazing places we went to.
Oh yeah, I mean it was like I said, like I love that. It's one of my favorite cities. I always tell people, I'm like, man, I know, like, because it's when people ask you, like, hey, like, where'd you go? Like, we're in Canada, and like Toronto it's of course it's the city. It's the one. If you know one city in Canada, it's Toronto. But I mean, man, there's a reason. It's so beautiful, and yeah, I love any chance I get to actually have a little bit of downtime there. But now it's kind of funny. So you bring up like the cocktail scene, but again, you're not just the Toronto ambassador or the Toronto is Quebec, right?
What's that, sorry?
Toronto is Quebec, right?
Oh, no.
Damn
Okay,
it.
here, listen.
Ontario.
Ontario. But
Okay.
I thought you were trying to start a fight there. But
No.
I told myself to not upset anyone.
No.
Especially people from Quebec.
No,
Yeah,
my point was going to be, oh God, I probably pissed off some people in the other provinces. But no, so you're not just an ambassador for Toronto or for the province, but for Canada. So of the places you've traveled, I mean, and obviously prior to the current situation, everything, where in Canada would you say is there like maybe a surprisingly great either whiskey or cocktail scene that maybe a city that maybe we, especially in America or around the world, may not have considered?
Yeah, I mean, most people, I think, when they think of coming to Canada, they would think of Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. However, and a lot of people in the team who are from that area never believe me, but my favorite part to go to is actually Halifax in Nova Scotia.
Oh, I
Um,
love
it's
Halifax.
it's a beautiful place with beautiful people. I do say it's probably one of the most Canadian cities in Canada because everyone's so nice. But the one thing I love about it is there's an amazing community of bartenders that are over there, and a lot of the people that work at the provincial liquor boards as well. They're all in amongst each other, and I really like that because I say a lot of these places are built through passion, and what keeps that passion up is having that camaraderie and not necessarily competition between one person to another. So
Yeah.
that's somewhere I would say. I would say for a lot of people, Halifax might not necessarily be on the map for everyone, and when they're coming to Canada, and it is like way out on the east coast as well. But 100%, if you do get a chance, try and get over there.
Yeah. No, I remember I think I got to do one or two live events there, and it's just a beautiful part of the country. I mean, that just like that whole coastal, that east coast of the Canada there is beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, it's something that I am missing. I must say, as I do see like a lot of my friends that are over there who are either in the industry or in the scene, and there's everything. It's almost as if the place hadn't stopped. Like a lot
Yeah.
of Canada has had to go down, and Halifax doesn't seem as if it's that way. Everyone's still enjoying themselves and being very creative, so it's good to
Well,
see.
that's good. That's great. So, I mean, but taking it back a little bit, let's talk about you just a little bit. I mean, what brought you to, like, I guess, to the whiskey business? I mean, what how did you get started in Scotch and in whiskey in general?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think myself being from just outside Glasgow, where there is quite a lot of heritage, obviously in Scotland for whiskey making, and another thing as well is when people actually get interested in whiskey, it's not always necessarily as young as what people may think. I
Mhm.
probably say I started really enjoying whiskey in my early 20s, and from there, a lot of the time, it was just me going out to a pub, enjoying a dram, not even taking much notice of what the whiskey was. I very much was, if it was a single malt or even some of the blends, I was more than happy. Didn't take too much notice of what I was drinking. Oh, I knew that I was enjoying it. And that was good enough for me. I didn't look into it too much. And it was actually going on a few years. And me and a few friends actually said, we should probably get into this more. We're very much enjoying drinking Scotch whiskey.
Yeah.
So we started a whiskey club together. And when you start to have people who are like minded in a club of any description, amazing things can happen. And when we started the Hit Flash Hiking Club, we would actually realize like this isn't just something that we do in the pub. This is something that's actually taken on a bit of a different monster. And before you know it, we're we're hosting tastings and things like that, and I get to present. And as soon as I started presenting, a lot of people said, "You've got a lot of passion for this." And I've never say I'm knowledgeable. I'll never say I'm the best public speaker, but I certainly do speak with passion. And that's kind of like when I started to actually realize that I'm in this amazing whiskey community who've really accepted me in.
I mean, passion, like, dude, I can't. I mean, obviously, again, coming from the wrestling world, passion can get you pretty damn far. And I mean, and it's a great jumping off point because then you a lot of those things like you don't like you can learn. You're gonna learn more every single day of your life. Hopefully, right? If we're lucky, we're learning new things about whatever industry you choose, especially something as complex and as layered and vast as whiskey. You're going to be learning things every single day. So, I mean, yeah, that passion, I mean, it shows through, and it obviously has carried you to where you are today. And I remember, I feel like I would be remiss. I think the first time we met, so like we met through when I started doing my wrestling with whiskey thing, and you followed and kind of kept in touch, and because you're a wrestling fan, if I may say,
Yep, yep.
and
You kind of guessed by all of the back here. I do have my Halloween mask ready. I do have a La Parka mask here, ready to
yes,
go for Saturday.
hell yeah. Um, so yeah, so like we finally actually got to meet up with I believe the first time New York.
That's correct. Yeah, yeah. That would have been WrestleMania week. Me and my
Yeah.
wife were over for a honeymoon, but unfortunately we couldn't make it to WrestleMania that year. Although we did go for our honeymoon, and then we went to New York for our anniversary a couple of years later. and that's
Yeah.
when we got to meet you. And
Yeah.
again, it seems to be a common trend with me and you and Matt. But again, we done a little bit of bar hopping that night as well.
Oh yeah, we saw a little bit of the best of Brooklyn. I will never forget. And this is honestly so like again, bourbon and rye guy, mostly bourbon. And again, and my dad is in the chat right now, and he's a huge Scotch drinker. That was his that was his go to for a long, long time, and it still is. But I'm turning him a little bit into a bourbon guy. But despite I never even getting when I got into whiskey, had never really turned that corner with malts or with Scotch. And I remember in particular, it was that weekend. And we had a couple, we like you said, we went to a couple of bars, but I do remember one in particular. And if you guys are in New York, Travel Bar in Brooklyn is an excellent whiskey bar. I know they've kind of opened and closed with the ongoing pandemic and everything, but if you have a chance to check them out, do. And I remember we sat down in the back, and you asked for the list, and you were just like, all right, let me look through here and see what we got here. And I will never forget. You had the Bunnahabhain PX sherry finished Scotch, and holy crap, like that was beyond sherry bomb. That was where I was like, I knew like I was gaining. I'm like, all right, I knew that Scotch and everything. I'm like, it's different, but I'm like, I can appreciate it. But that made me go, holy crap, like. The amazing things you can do with this spirit, like that blew my mind. And it was just and then from there it just grew, and since then I've had the chance to try some other amazing things and everything like that. So I that is one weekend I will never ever forget, and again helped me turn the corner on something new, which is so much excuse me, what I'm trying to say. So much of what this hobby, what this experience, what this industry is about is just expanding that palette and learning new things.
Yeah, 100%. And that's where I think that's it. It's like I think a lot of people sometimes find a Scotch whiskey that does break them through, and it's kind of like, okay, this is something maybe it surprises them. So I didn't realize there was those sort of flavors in a Scotch whiskey. And sometimes when people start on Scotch whiskey, sometimes they don't necessarily know what to look for. And I'd probably say Scotch whiskey didn't really do itself a huge amount of favors for a lot of the time with marketing. There's a lot of things we were pushing out there. We're trying to go for easy drinking, and smooth was used quite a lot.
Yeah.
But there's a huge amount of nuances there that people in the industry are now more confident to talk about, and some of those unusual flavors. Because I think a lot of people now have got a little bit more of an educated palate now, I'd probably say, than what they were before. So when it comes to especially like peated whiskies, people aren't scared to hide what those flavors are. So if you get sometimes if you've created a whiskey and there's notes in there that almost smell like smoked haddock, yeah, we'll tell you, and not everyone wants that in a whiskey, and that's okay. But there's those very unusual flavors which are in Scotch whiskey, and for a lot of people, they don't actually recognize that's what they're looking for until they've tasted it, and then before you know it, there's a huge amount of variety out there to go to.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true, and that's a great little segue into what we are drinking tonight. So we are drinking two different options from the Ardbeg lineup, and for those who know, obviously Ardbeg is known for their peated scotches for sure. So I mean, before we dive into those, why don't you give us a little bit of the lay of the land, a little bit of the story of Ardbeg itself?
Yeah. And it is an amazing story. Like I know yourself, you're an amazing storyteller. Not only when you're doing your show, but obviously we've seen you in the ring and things like that. And there's a huge amount you can talk about storytelling in terms of complexity. But a lot of people will say a simple story, you've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And a lot of storytellers, especially filmmakers, will tell you that to make a good story, you sometimes need a little bit of tragedy. And I do say this: if you're a fan of a good story, you're going to love Ardbeg because there's a huge amount of tragedy involved, and it's not always just been rosy days. So Ardbeg itself, although it started in 1815, and it's a distillery on the small island of Islay off the west coast of Scotland. And on Islay, there's 9 distilleries. We're very proud to be a part of a whiskey island that all the distilleries are amazing. Like there's not, I'd hate to say there's actual real competition. It just happens to be that every distillery in this small part of Scotland, and therefore a small part of the world, every one of them makes wonderful whiskey. And we ourselves, though, we actually think that we ourselves and all of the distilleries, we actually do make different types of whiskey. And I think for a lot of people, it's maybe getting through that barrier. Once you're into the peated style of whiskey, then I think a lot of people on Ireland that you've came to the right place, because all of them on the island do at least one type. And when it comes to ourselves, like we started in 1815, a lot of the whiskey back then in the industry wasn't necessarily being released as single malts. A lot of the time, you would make malt whiskey out of distillery, and then it would be sold to a whiskey blender, and then they would use the malt component to put into their blends. So Ardbeg was actually really recognized as being a high quality malt all the way back in the 1800s and into the early 1900s. But unfortunately, what happened is that there's a terrible time with Scotch whiskey. There's a terrible time with Scotch whiskey in the 1980s, and it's actually called the whiskey flood or the whiskey lock. And the whiskey flood actually was probably the worst time it's been in Scotch whiskey in recent memory. A third of all distilleries actually shut down. Whoa. Which is remarkable to think of that now. Like nowadays, you're getting distilleries open up all the time. And unfortunately, Ardbeg was one of them that closed down. Now, it wasn't to do with the quality of Ardbeg. It just happened to be a lot of people said there was pretty much too much whiskey around and maybe not as much demand. Nowhere near the whiskey boom we're in at the moment. So Ardbeg was actually closed for all of the 1980s. And then when it reopened in 1990, it was only open for about 6 years, but only ran for 2 months of the year. Now, my whole thing of this is that from the 1980s all the way to 1996, Ardbeg didn't really get made. And the way I sort of say in the 90s, it's kind of like if you, obviously being in Canada, it might be more here. But I do know in Chicago it gets cold as well. But I remember when I was younger, you'd have my brother and sister would just start a car in the winter, not to drive, just to get the engine going.
Oh yeah. That's you have to. Oh yeah, you got to. Thank God for remote starts now here in Chicago. You just point it out the window. But yeah, before you'd have to run out there in your coat and your pajamas, turn the car on, and let it sit for 10 minutes before you could go anywhere.
Well, that's essentially what happened to Ardbeg. They ran it for 2 months of the year, not necessarily to go out there and have Ardbeg up and running. It was essentially just to make sure that all the production could possibly be. So the whole point of this is that Ardbeg, really, when it came to the 80s into the 90s, none get made. What happened is that when Glenmorangie took over in 1997, a lot of people say they rescued Ardbeg because the bulldozers were at the door. But interestingly enough, when the doors opened again, we had people coming from different parts of the UK, different parts of mainland Europe as well. And they were coming to us with Ardbeg that they'd purchased in the past, like from the 70s. And they were letting us try it. And we're like, who are these people? Because it just seemed that even though not a huge amount of people had tried Ardbeg, anyone that did try it absolutely loved it. So we went towards, it was incredible. We actually had this almost like a focus group ready to go. So these people who are actually fanatical about Ardbeg, it's like, okay, we've already found our focus group. Let's just concentrate on making these people happy. And if we can do that, we might actually have a distillery in this. And that's always been the influence. So in terms of like when Ardbeg reopened, everything we've done was back to what we call the Ardbeg Committee, which is something you can still sign up on our website for it, but it's a real loyal bunch. And I dare say, I dare say it's a little bit of a cult mentality as well.
That's good. A good old whiskey cult. It's a whiskey cult, though. That's okay.
But it was remarkable though. Since then, Ardbeg itself, it's went from strength to strength. We've got an amazing bunch of people that work at the distillery. There's about, I think there's around about 80 people that are hired at Ardbeg distillery, which considering there's only 3,000 people on the island of Islay, or just over 3,000. So it's a fair amount of them. And they're all amazing. They really are. And away from that, we also have our whiskey creation team, and it's up to them to take all the whiskies and create these wonderful different expressions that we've got. But a lot of what we do, we take inspiration from what the Ardbeg fans do want. And one thing I will say, they're not necessarily run of the mill. Like some of the things that they come out with in terms of like, have you tried this? Can we give this a try? And our whiskey makers are like that. We didn't know anyone liked that kind of stuff, but sure, we'll give it a try.
Now, it's funny, or it's interesting to me. So you talk about how the 80s and everything were a real downtime. Now, I mean, was that industry wide or was that Ardbeg specific?
No, that was industry wide. In fact, we actually lost some real historic
Oh,
distilleries
that's
back
right.
then.
Yes, it's what you were saying.
Uh,
So I
for,
wonder, no, well, because that happened here in the mostly in the 70s and 80s. Same thing for American whiskey. What do you know what they could attribute that to? Were people just drinking like vodka and clear spirits then for you guys as well?
um, there's different reasons for it, but a lot of the time, what was kind of happening was you actually had a lot of the companies that didn't just own one distillery. So if you own one distillery, there's a good chance you actually kept that distillery open throughout the 80s. However, if you had, say, five, maybe 10 distilleries, and you kind of found that maybe one or two were making spirit that's somewhat similar to each other. Now, bear in mind,
Mm,
although we do talk about single malts a lot more now than what we did then, single malts still did exist and they're still very popular. But when it comes to then a blended Scotch for a lot of the companies, a lot of the distilleries were used just to get that malt component to put towards blended Scotch. So when times started to go down a little bit, a lot of distilleries just started to kind of I want to use I shouldn't use this, but kind of like amalgamate some of the distilleries.
okay.
So if you have two distilleries making peated whiskey of a very similar style, they may close one and keep the other one open.
Oh, okay. I gotcha.
Yeah. So it's that
Well,
thing, and some of the distilleries we lost were like Port Ellen, Broda, Glenmore, Carstbridge. There's
yeah.
a lot of amazing distilleries that went there, and what's happened now, even though they themselves are maybe not, I don't want to say they weren't respected. They were respected, but necessarily they weren't collector's items. They were regular, just good whiskey,
Yeah.
and now it became these massive collector's items since the distilleries have closed down.
Of course. Well, yeah, of course. And the minute you can't have something, it's the greatest thing on earth, and you have to have it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's and you know yourself when it comes to what it's like trying to get a bottle of good bourbon nowadays, you're having to like elbow people out the way to get it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And so that actually kind of brings another question to mind too, which is because similarly with the bourbon boom over here, a lot of people have bought up kind of like defunct names, like old copyrighted names from distilleries and pre-prohibition, and are now starting them up as craft distilleries or something again. Have you seen any of that in Scotch? Have people kind of bought up those old names or copyrights from some of those closed distilleries and tried to relaunch the name at least?
Yeah, you know what? There have been a few people who have tried to do that, and I think that what's quite good about it is I've got confidence. I've done it with a lot of respect. Now it's kind of when it comes to the branding for a lot of distilleries back then, it's not necessarily, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people agree with this. Scotch whisky distilleries back then do not carry the same sort of cool appeal as what a lot of the American whiskey brands do. Like a lot of American whiskey brands are based on people, and it's
Mm-hmm.
someone's name there, and you've got a story immediately. A lot of the ones in Scotland are based after these, just named after a small village, and there might be one or two that they may want to take on to kind of tell the story of the distillery, what it used to be, and things like that. It's probably not as common because it's probably a little bit tougher to market to do that.
Sure, I could see that.
Yeah, but I will say something though. I will say that, but I think it's really good though. We do have distillers that are coming kind of like back from the dead. Like so, I say Ardbeg was one that closed down, then that reopened. But thankfully, there's been other distilleries been closed for a long time, and there's actually plans for them to reopen. Port Ellen and Brora being the two famous ones, which are
Okay.
actually going to eventually be reopened.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Well, I mean, obviously, Ardbeg, like you said, it survived and it has come back and it's come roaring back and jumped, and like I said, well into the world of especially peated Scotch ending. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what we are going to be drinking tonight and what should we start off with first?
Yeah. So in terms of we've got two of our core range we're going to be trying. So one of the ones is Ardbeg Anno.
Yep.
Anno. It looks as if it's Anoa, but you'll learn when it comes to Scotch language, let's talk in Gaelic, it's quite difficult. You have to kind of second guess yourself. So it's Anno, not Anoa, Anno.
Okay.
And the next one I'm going to try is actually a new release. So this is Ardbeg 5 Years Old Wee Beastie. I will start off in the Anno. Now, just so anyone knows, in terms of our core range, the core range includes the Anno and the Wee Beastie. There's also Ardbeg 10 years old. There's also Ardbeg Ugadal and Ardbeg Corrie Vrecken as well. Now, what's interesting about it is all of them, when it comes to the actual spirit that we use that goes into the casks, all of the spirit has got the same phenolic content. So that doesn't change. One of the things that will change will be the different casks we're using and also the age of it. And on some of them, actually, the ABV. We don't really stick to like one ABV, interestingly enough. Like, so it's not as if everything's 40% or even everything's 46. It does vary. And our whiskey makers, because they're dealing with big flavors, they've actually chosen what they believe to be the best on it. In terms of what we look at as well, we look at the way we describe whiskey is not just smoke. And all of our whiskies are heavily peated. And what I usually say is, when it comes to nosing and Ardbeg, is that if you get smoke, you're 100% correct. If you get peat, you are 100% correct. But there's a little bit more to it. And here's the way that I usually describe it. And it's something that our whiskey creation team actually taught me and our education team and brand ambassadors this, and it's really stuck with me. When it comes to describing the phenolics flavors in a peated whiskey, if you think about it in terms of savory notes, medicinal notes, coal smoke, wood smoke, and herbal notes. Now, all those notes in there, if you'd say smoke, you're correct. But what type of smoke it is, can just take that a little bit further. And so this is the Ardbeg Anno to begin with. And the Anno is a combination of 3 different types of cask. And so we're using here American oak, which is ex-bourbon, and that's probably the most common type of cask you're going to be using in Scotch whiskey, actually. And we're also using charred virgin oak. So taking that technique, which has been perfected in the American whiskey industry. So we're taking the virgin oak that you usually be using for American whiskey, especially bourbon. We're using that, but also as well, and this goes back to like one of your favorite whiskeys you were chatting about earlier, we're also using those super sweet sherry casks from Spain, the PEATED casks, and using Pedro Jimenez casks and peated whiskey. Oh, it's a match made in heaven. So this is what this is. Now, usually what I say is, like, I know yourself, Matt, like you've got an amazing palate and you're going to have all these notes, but what I usually say to people, because people might think that I know better, I don't. When it comes to Ardbeg, shout something out. You could be right, honestly, when it comes to the notes. And it's not a case you have to be scared about it. And
I think that goes for whiskey in general. I mean, again, it's such an individual experience. Like, again, there are people who study this and know it, but man, at the end of the day, it's such an individual experience, and you know, the way you take it in. And we've talked about this before on the show too. I mean, what you've eaten that day, the mood you're in, the music you're listening to, do you have a cold or not? There's so many things that can affect the way you taste and smell every single day, that whiskey can be a different experience every single day.
Yeah. And you know what? And actually, specifically about the Anno, this was actually, it's a relatively new whiskey for us in our core range. We took a little bit of inspiration from the Ardbeg committee because it was a whiskey we had as a limited edition. And so it's actually this one up here, if you want to see that. That's called Ardbeg Dark Cove. And it was a special release for Ardbeg Day, which is part of the Feis Eel Whiskey Festival in Islay, and it's now expanded. We have Ardbeg Days all over the place, all over the world now. And Dark Cove was actually one that a lot of people really said that's like an amazing flavour between that kind of sweetness you get in the PX cats along with the smoke. So that was a little bit of inspiration. Dr. Bill Lumsden, Gillian McDonald and Brendan Mccarron worked together to see, well, let's not just replicate that. Let's try and get something that's inspired by what people liked about it and create something different. I personally, when I first got into it, I seen it as a lovely whiskey, which was peaty and sweety. So sweety peaty. And but there's more to it, and there really is. And it's something that it took me a few months to actually maybe in the right place to find it. But to me, this is super herbaceous. And to me, it's almost foresty is the way that I describe it. There's a little bit of menthol in there, which I always get excited about in Scotch whiskey. When you do get a little bit of menthol, you do get a little bit almost like smoky tea leaves as well, which is in there.
Yes, I get the tea leaves 100%.
And that to me is like, and also as well, those things there, I would be scared to say that about another whiskey. When it comes to Ardbeg, it's like you can just say something out there and it might be right.
Just take a swing at it, right? But so that's something I've come like again, and I think if there's anything in Scotch whiskey that is intimidating to the especially the Western American whiskey drinker, it's the peated. Oh, it's the campfire thing, right? But I have with almost to a whiskey. Is if you literally and this I'm a huge noser. Like I mean, my palate is decent in getting, but man, I am so about the nosing and. Yeah, that's usually the first thing that comes on a peated scotch. It hits you, but give it 10 seconds to breathe in the glass and go back, and you will find more. You just give it, yeah, literally give it two, more than one sniff, and you start to find a world of things. And when somebody first told me, and it might have been you for all I know, of those notes you described earlier of like the almost like the salty, briny, like meaty notes. I'm so used to looking, yeah, I'm so used to looking for like, where's the fruit? Where's the sugar? Where's the caramel? But yeah, with some of these, it's like salted fish. Like that,
Yeah.
and I never, and it sounds like a weird note, I know, but it's actually fascinating and pleasant on a whiskey.
It is, and I think the idea about it is every whiskey. A lot of people would say when it comes to balance, that's the thing. So if you've got those incredibly unique notes, if you can wrap it around something as well, that's like the absolute key. And I
Oh
think
yeah,
I will say all of our Ardbegs I think are balanced, but there's usually just at least one or two of these really weird notes that pop up, and it always even surprise me. There's some whiskies that I'll go back to I've not tried in a couple of years, and I'll go back to. I'm like that. I can never remember this having like this really weird note
oh yeah.
of like hot sauce in it, you know.
But I mean, and that's what it, again, always expanding. You're always going to pick new things. But I mean, God, this is sweet too. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I would be remiss if I didn't say it is. There is sweetness to it. I haven't even sipped it yet, but you can smell there is this kind of light sweetness to it as well.
And I will say, it's something that I got taught about 5 or 6 years ago, actually, and it was actually in terms of nosing. And it's something that kind of changed because a lot of times when I would go to any whiskey, because I wasn't really trained, I would say, to even pick out flavors. But a friend of mine said that what you can do is, as it's at your nose, instead of inhaling through your nose, inhale through your mouth. So it's like you're doing this. And it takes away the astringency you sometimes get through your nose, but like here, and it just softens it a little bit. And it's just
Yes.
it's a different experience you're getting from it. So I do recommend that if you feel like you're not getting enough from a whiskey of any description, just nose it in a slightly different way.
That
But
was
it's
one of the things I was taught too about no, it was open your mouth and bring it on like, and I wouldn't believe like you could almost you start tasting things on the nose almost. You can feel
oh
it
yeah,
like
for sure.
in every sensory kind of vein there. Well,
So so I'm looking forward to you trying it.
yes.
It's 46.6% ABV and it's non-chill filtered. All of the Ardbegs are minimum of 46%. They're all non-chill filtered and there's no caramel added as well. So it's all pretty much as we believe that it's the way that Ardbeg should be.
And just because I know I'm going to get the question, and we're Americans and we're obsessed, and I know it's blended or batched or whatever. What kind of age range is this usually in?
Yeah, that's a really good question actually. So in terms of how we've actually done it, so it's three different types of casks which are fully matured, and the casks themselves are going to be different ages. Now, one thing I would say with Ardbeg, so Dr. Boyle Lumsden is actually, and Brendan McCarron both said this, when it comes to an Ardbeg, with an Ardbeg that doesn't have an age on it, the youngest component you're probably going to see in that, in terms of modern Ardbegs at least, is going to be around about 8 years old. However, on those, if you imagine the cask I was telling you about in terms of those casks that are using the Ano, the big PEATED cask, that's a hugely powerful cask you're using, and the charred virgin oak's the same. Now, some of those might be around about 10 years old, but it may also be whiskies in there which are a little bit older as well.
Sure.
And when it comes to the Ano, the reason we have an Ardbeg 10 years old, which now I know in the States you've got a better deal than we do in Canada when it comes to the cost of your alcohol. So I'll probably take a guess at what it is. But Ardbeg 10, say that's around about, I think, like $80 in the States.
Okay.
The Ano will be around about $10 more, a little bit more. And part of it is because of the cost of those casks. and those PX casks are incredibly pricey and very hard to come by.
Yeah.
So the two of them are around about the same age. So the Anno and the 10 years old are around about the same, but the Anno is just a slightly more expensive purely because of the price of those casks.
Gotcha. I don't know about you. I've smelled this a lot. But let's go ahead and drink it. Cheers to everybody.
Yep. Cheers, everyone. Now, texture is one of the things that I pick up on immediately when it comes to a whiskey. It's something that I think is quite underappreciated. And that real chewiness you get, like I concentrate a lot on my first sip just on the viscosity of this whiskey.
Yes.
It's quite, a lot of Ardbegs will be quite oily, but this I think has got the chewiest kind of style of it as well. And so the first sip I get is really just try to get the chewiness away.
Yeah, and that's fascinating to me because I'm with you. Like, I'm still learning to pick out flavors on my palate, but I'm a huge texture guy. And yes, this is, I mean, right off the bat is viscous. And what kind of blows my mind about it is with bourbon, I normally start picking that up when our proof is like maybe 100 or north of 100. That's when I start feeling a little bit more of that chewier bourbon. You know, it's less watered down and everything. But at 46, this is substantial on the mouthfeel.
Oh yeah. There's a friend of mine back home in Scotland, and she said something I'll never forget. But she actually has a hatred of what she calls skinny whiskey, and I'm totally with her. I'm totally with her. It's like
I get it.
I'm with you. I think for a lot of the bourbons that I enjoy, and American whiskeys in general, it usually is more towards the higher proof of them, and especially if it comes to that texture, and it almost like it just seems to sit above your mouth. It's so thick.
Yeah.
And on Scotch whiskey, you will get that, but I think in terms of that oiliness and on the viscosity of it, it's the first thing that gets me on this whiskey is that. And I'm really glad you pointed that out.
Yeah. No, that it's very, again, as a bourbon drinker, it's very surprising to see it at 46. It is. It's oily. There is like a almost, I don't know what. With that little bit of like earthy smokiness, there is a kind of saltiness to it, like a sea salt taste to it a little bit. But underneath that is this like, it's grassy and caramel. Like there again, I keep coming back. There is that sweetness under there though. Like it's not lost. Yeah. It's not lost at all.
There is, and I think the viscosity kind of, to me, and I'm always trying to pick out what sweet is, because sometimes you get sweetness where it's like, is it that type of like a really lovely vanilla and caramel sweetness you get on maybe a lot of the bourbons or American whiskies, and even our sister distiller Glenmorangie, that carries quite a lot of vanilla as well. And on this one here, I'm not even, there is sweetness in there. It took me a long time to figure out what it was, and I think it's almost as rich as sometimes having a little bit of like licorice that's there. And there's also a little bit, and I'm not even a big fan of licorice, but I like it in my whiskey. and it's, so you do get that. It's a very rich kind of sweetness. And also as well, you do get, I think, quite a lot of the dried fruit flavors, almost like, you get chocolate covered raisins. I know here, and you're going to have to help me out here. I know yourself. I mean, I get the impression you've never eaten a carb in your life, Matt.
Oh,
I don't know if there's any.
Shut up. Everyone always said I eat carbs all the time, and that's gonna make more people even more mad. I know, but like,
we've seen how hard you work out. You're allowed to. But I would say for this one, those chocolate covered raisins you get. Now I don't know what they're called in the States. Here they're called glossettes, and there's so glossettes.
We call them chocolate covered raisins.
Yeah. But that's what I get on this. And that's the sweetness I get. It's like a chewy chocolate raisin, you're guessing.
I get the raisin, yeah. When you say it like almost like a black licorice kind of thing. For me, I get like that dark licorice, that super dark kind of cherry with almost a little bit of bitterness in there. I 100% get that.
And the finish on it as well, like I say with the Anno, like you get your money's worth. Like when you take a sip of it, it hangs around.
Yeah.
And there's certain whiskies there that you might want to go back to more, and you will. But I do recommend it if it's your first time trying the Anno. Like, do your best to take your time with it. Like, just try it sip by sip, and then just let the flavors evolve as you go. It's a nice enough whiskey if you just want to enjoy yourself and go back. But I will say,
Sure.
it's a whiskey that I think you should take your time with.
Yeah, and I'm like, and I noticed this in general with Scotch, and especially with something like that, like the finishes. So in bourbon, again, like I feel bad because I'm always throwing it back to bourbon because that's my home base. But we get these finishes that, like, when they're longer, it's like this it's almost like this tingling spice. It's rolling down the back of your throat and everything for a while. But here, and maybe it is the slightly lower ABV and everything, but the flavor stays. It's just not quite as like a bourbon finish and everything like that. But it is, you sit there and you're mindful of it, and it's like it's sticking to the roof of your mouth. It's still on your tongue. Like 30 seconds, a minute later, you're still, you're still getting new things. You're getting new. I'm getting almost like rye bread notes now off the end of it. You know what I mean? Like these more like grainy bread kind of notes. It's interesting.
Yeah. And this is a good thing as well. And this is why I really love like having a dram with you, Matt. This is where our nights sometimes go a bit longer than ours. I know it'd be like me and you and my wife would be around. And the three of us, as soon as we start talking about whiskey, like you get something you get very excited about, so I have to have another sip. Then I say something, you get excited, you have another sip. So, but you
100%.
should be drinking responsibly as always. But
but it's a great conversation starter. That's the other thing about it. That's what I truly believe. Whiskey can bring people together because I think it's such a conversation starter, and there's so much to talk about, like, and experience, and everyone's tasting different things, and that's one of the things I love about it.
Yeah, and I think I really like the idea when you're talking about coming from the American whiskey background and seeing those parallels there, because I certainly believe there's more parallels than what meets the eye. I think especially when you talk about a lot of the American whiskies, I think there is a certain type of American whiskey enthusiast that does love big flavors. And they may start on small flavors. They may start going for something that is just towards a sweet, lovely, there's lots of caramel, lots of vanilla, lots of like that kind of oak spice, which a lot of American whiskies do have. But as soon as you get to these higher ABV ones, like more like a punch of peat, those connoisseurs that like that, I think that's a parallel to Scotch whiskey. I think there's the same sort of people there.
That, and I also like to sometimes remind people, I'm like, you realize, like, when the old Holy Grail bourbon was created, it was created by a bunch of people who made Scotch and then came over to here as immigrants and just made whiskey with what they had available on the land there. There wasn't a lot of barley, so they said, I'll take the corn and make it. And so that's where, you know what I mean? It was essentially a bunch of Scotsmen who took corn and made whiskey. Is kind of how bourbon came to be born for the most part. So never forget your heritage.
I know. And also as well, it's a great advert for immigration as well.
Right? Hell yeah, absolutely. Immigrants get that ish done.
So that's the Anno, and the Anno is a whiskey that I really have grown to love. I'd probably say that I was very much a fan of it when I first tried it for the first few 2 or 3 months, and it's actually launched in Canada not too long after I had started. Okay. So I remember really getting to know it though, maybe about a year ago, and that's when I really started to understand what the Anno is. And I think a lot of it was for me kind of like missing the idea of going out hiking and going out into the forest and doing those sort of things, because I just kind of like forgotten what that smells like and what these aromas are around me. And it was actually when I went for a little bit of a hike when I was over in Vancouver, and I've been to certain hikes about Canada. And I remember like going back to the Anno then. I'm like, that's what it is. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it's actually that idea of more of like a sense of nature when you're getting it. So it's became one of my favorite whiskies. And that's a whiskey we've done really well with. But I was saying before how Ardbeg fans, can sometimes be a little bit different. And we always listen to Ardbeg fans and we take our inspiration from what they're looking for. Well, a wee quick story. Dr. Bill Lumsden was doing a tasting a number of years ago. And I believe he said it was in Germany, it was. And Germany is one of our biggest markets for Ardbeg. People in Germany absolutely love Ardbeg. And there was 6 whiskies that were there. And Dr. Bill had brought over actually just to just for curiosity to bring out I think it was a 4-year-old Ardbeg, straight from the cask, and they put that in amongst the lineup, and wouldn't you know it, that was the one that everyone asked for. It's like, can you give us this? And there's some fans of distilleries out there where they'll say, can you give us your oldest? Can you give us like a 30-year-old? And Ardbeg fans are like, no, actually, we just want it as close as it can be, straight off the still. And this 3-year-old whiskey people are talking about, when's that going to come out? So Dr. Bill Lumsden kind of had in his head, maybe one day that'll happen. Brendan Mccarron came along as well, so he's been with the company for a little while now. And he himself, when he actually was round the distillery at Ardbeg, he was actually getting a chance to sample some of these younger Ardbegs for the first time. And he himself, again, got wildly excited about how young Ardbeg is. There's a huge amount of character, even at a young age. But that's two people in a wee group. We kind of had to look at a bit more in terms of like a focus group. But we actually had confidence to release a younger age statement whiskey based on a whiskey that we released just soon after Glenmorangie took over Ardbeg. We were about to release an Ardbeg 10 years old, and you have to wait 10 years for that, obviously. So what they did instead was they started to release whiskies of a younger age in between, and it was like kind of like to show people what is happening to the spirit. And the first whiskey released of that, we never tried to fool the public. We released a whiskey of about 5 or 6 years old, and we called it Ardbeg Very Young, which is the best name for a whiskey I think I've ever heard.
And straightforward, to the point. I like it.
That's it. Yeah. And have you noticed, I was trying to buy a bottle of that last month, and it was in a Scotch whiskey auction website, which I was going to buy and then send to my parents in Scotland. And I thought maybe I'll buy it for maybe £200, which seems quite a lot for a 6-year-old whiskey. Yeah. I lost out in the auction. It ended up going for over £400, and that was a 6-year-old Ardbeg.
Oh my God!
And there's something about it. It's like, in terms of people who go after it, Ardbeg fans generally, like, there's a curiosity that a lot of Ardbeg fans have, and it's about these different flavors you get in whiskey. It's not necessarily about the prestige of having older whiskey, and we do have those. Don't get me wrong, but the actual idea of people reaching out to us and saying, if you can give us it. Now, another thing as well, and this is the Ardbeg Wee Beastie. Now, the nickname of it we have is Wee Beastie. The other thing you'll notice, though, there's an age statement on there. And
yeah.
Having a 5-year, and we're proud to say it's 5 years old. And that's unusual. We won't say we're the first people to do this. We're not going to say any of the first, but it's unusual. And Absolutely. I'm so proud to work for a distillery. And only certain distillers can get away with it, I think.
And I mean, I was about to say, I'm like, it's fascinating. So this is going to bring me to like, and hopefully it doesn't go down too much of a rabbit hole, but like, so for us over here, like your typical American bourbon on the, especially if it's non-age shaded from one of the major producers, you can pretty much bet it's somewhere 4 to 8 years. That's the standard kind of American bourbon. And I feel like with Scotch, your entry kind of standard flagship Scotches are usually that 10, 12. I see every major company has a 10-year and a 12-year that's pretty much regularly available and things like that. And so it's fascinating to see, boom, plastered right there. Screw it. 5 years, baby. Like that's really, and the fact that we are not there yet, everybody in America, but the fact that like 5-year people are like, that's freaking cool. Like I want the younger one. Like I don't need the 15-year. Give me the 5-year. Give me the 4-year or whatever. That's a kind of a fun little story.
I think I thought it was remarkable because we got a little bit of an insight, of course, in the team and saying that, well, we're thinking of doing this, and me and my boss, who's actually from Islay, so we heard that this was happening. And we had our fingers crossed, like, please put an A statement on it. They'll understand. People will understand. And they put an A statement on it, and we were delighted to see. And it's something, you know what? And I think itself is. I've always kind of had this opinion where, well, you know what? That's a lie. I didn't always have this opinion. This kind of came later on, but now I think good whiskey is good whiskey, and I think to be transparent, that say it's 5 years old is one thing, but you need a good whiskey to back it up. And thankfully, a lot of people already have been really enjoying this. It's an Ardbeg. You can kind of have a nose of it. It still carries everything you're going to expect. But I was telling you before, remember, about the different types of smoke you're getting in there, and I'd probably say there's more herbaceous notes you get in the anno. I think for this, you do get a little bit of that, but it's different again.
Man, you know what? Well, there's two things. One, I need to pour a little bit another of the NO again because so it's this thing is younger. So again, my this is fascinating to me because my common logic with especially with like again with American whiskey, blah blah blah. Younger means harsher, means more astringent, means all these things, right? It's rougher. It's rougher at it when it's younger. But and so with an Ardbeg, with a peated Scotch, and it's younger, my brain immediately is going to go, all right, it's going to be harsher in general because it's a young whiskey, and then it's just like the peat notes, all this stuff is going to be a little bit more like rough, right? Rough around the edges. So that I know, man. And here's the beastie. Maybe I'm crazy. This is sweeter than the Ano.
Yes. Okay. That there, I'm really glad you said that.
There's more fruit. There's more, yeah, there's more like almost sugary, like fruity note, like which blows my mind. You call something a beast and it's from Ardbeg. I'm assuming it's going to be a smoke detector sensation. And it's like, it's very nice. It's light. It's sweet. It's a lot of things. That is very surprising. That is not what I was expecting.
I'm exactly the same. I remember nosing it, and it was with one of my colleagues from Scotland, and we were going to nose this. They're going to be maybe thinking it's just smoke. We don't do just smoke. There's always something else along with it. In this case, you're absolutely right, Matt. There's this very unusual sweetness that's in there, and to me, it's actually I think we're happy to say it's young because it's 5 years old, but there is a freshness there. And that freshness, I think, is something that really jumps out. I think I try to figure out what type of smoke it is. I'm going back and forth on it. First of all, I got a little bit of medicinal notes in there, but not super medicinal, kind of like Corey Brecken. But also get a little bit of like cold smoke, like a dry smoke that's in there as well. But,
yeah, I think with like I said, with those sweeter notes, I get a little bit of like the almost medicinal makes sense to me, almost like a grape cough medicine kind of thing, right? Like. You get a little bit of that because it's still sweet, but it's got a little bit of that like that kind of herbal medicinal note.
That's an amazing note, Matt. If you don't mind, I'm going to steal that for the next time I'm presenting.
Please. I get it in this, and I get it in higher aged bourbons. Like I get it in like my Weller 12 or like lower proof, higher aged bourbons. I get this like grape medicine note.
Wow.
And I'm getting it here is interesting thing.
But I think it's a fascinating whiskey, and it's more ways than one. I don't know if this is going to come through, but I do have an Ardbeg 10 here, which I'm going to pour.
Were you just asking if like the nose was going to come through the screen? Because the answer is no. We're not there yet, Bri. I wish one day. One day.
Well, you're such a poet, Matt. I imagine that everyone when they hear tasting notes, it's almost as if they're here. So I'm going to have a look here. Now these are two whiskies here. Now the one that I'm going to hold up here is Ardbeg 10 years old, and this is now all of our Ardbegs do not contain any caramel coloring. So this is a natural color we're talking about here. So this is Ardbeg 10 years old, and it's not necessarily the darkest of whiskies. But I actually say this quite a lot. This is a fantastic Ardbeg 10. Is one of the best examples of a spirit-driven whiskey, because there's not a huge amount here to hide. Here's the Wee Beastie, and the Wee Beastie is actually darker.
Yeah, it is.
Ardbeg is a 10.
That's wild.
It's kind of like everything about every time I come to the Wee Beastie, there's always something else that's really cool to talk about. But even that there kind of turns on its head, and a lot of people will say that the older the whiskey, the darker it has to be.
Right.
Not at all.
So what? To that end,
to open up a lot more.
Yeah, to that end, what is the method of maturation for Wee Beastie? What kind of barrels are used for that?
Yeah. So for instance, for Ardbeg 10, that's 10 years old in exclusively American oak, ex-bourbon casks. For Wee Beastie, we're using American oak ex-bourbon casks, but we're probably using a little bit more first fill casks in the Wee Beastie than what we would in the Ardbeg 10. Also, as well, we're using a little bit of those Oloroso sherry casks, which
Oh,
we've also
okay.
used in our whiskey Ugadal, which is a big favourite of Ardbeg fans. So it's not exactly the same proportions of what you get in Ugadal because our whiskey makers will tweak it each time,
Yeah.
and the ABV is a little bit lower on Wee Beastie, and I say it's a little bit lower, but this still is 47.4% alcohol by
Hmm.
volume. But it's a remarkable whiskey and super exciting and super fun.
Yeah.
Remember when whiskey used to be fun, Matt?
Oh, it's still fun. If it wasn't, I wouldn't be doing this bull crap. I wouldn't be putting all this effort into this thing I got going on here. I'm having a blast every day of my life with this stuff. Well, again, I've been smelling the crap out of this. Let's take a little sip. Mm. More spice. Excuse me. More spice on that one for me.
Yeah,
I
I
get
think the
more.
first thing I used to get was a little bit on the back was like black pepper.
Yes. Yep. More pepper spices for sure.
Yeah.
That's, no, I love going back. So it's fascinating because the Ano was a little bit smokier on the nose to me than the Wee Beastie. The Wee Beastie was a little sweeter on the nose, but I feel like on the palate they're a little bit flipped. There's a
Yeah,
little
I'm
bit
with you on
more.
that. Yeah.
There's a little bit more smoke and spice on this, and a little bit more sweetness on the initial palate at least of the Ano.
And I think as well, I think there's like a lot of the times when it comes to a smoking peated whiskey, you're you're kind of expecting a little bit of what's going to happen next. And I think those notes that I'm getting on the nose in terms of that type of smoke, that kind of dry smoke, you don't really get that on there. It goes a little bit more medicinal on there and a little bit more herbaceous.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, someone actually, again, because I'm fantastic at stealing other people's notes when I hear something exciting, but someone actually said that the Ardbeg 5 Wee Beastie actually has got a little bit almost like a mezcal type of smoke to it. It's like which is in there.
Oh,
And I think I get that. I don't, and I, like I myself, I am a fan of mezcal, but I'll never call myself an expert at all. So try to pick out those notes, almost like a little bit of vegetal notes and a little bit
okay.
of savory.
So as you were talking, I took a big deep whiff after I've tasted it and everything. And the mezcal, I do get a little bit, but man, I don't know what the hell it was or what's going on with me today, but on a big deep kind of inhale, especially, I notice things change after I take a sip. Sometimes it coats the glass and things like that, but Green Jolly Rancher. I don't know what the hell is going on, but I get this like kind of like sweet, slightly like bitter apple, but like this kind of tanginess. I don't know, but I get like this green candy.
I'm definitely going to have to buy a pack of these and try and check this. I cannot remember the last time I had Jolly Ranchers. It wasn't a common thing growing up in Scotland. We didn't get all these
Yeah.
from North America.
I don't know. Yeah, just like a little bit. There's this sweetness underneath that smoke that I'm getting like this
But I think it's fascinating.
candied.
Though. It's a fascinating whiskey for me. I've had
Yeah.
such an amazing time, and sometimes obviously a lot of people know, like I've got the dream job, and I really do. This is something. This is all I've got, but it's something that it's the only thing I can do. And I'm treated quite a lot. There's a lot of whiskies I've tried, but sometimes you get a whiskey and it's just fascinating and it's fun, and you're trying to dissect it. But every time you're going back, it's that. But also as well, like I've shared this with friends, and it's a lovely whiskey just to share without having to think about it as well.
Yeah.
It's not just how different it is. That's a very pleasant peated whiskey for me as well. But it's
Yeah.
at the same time, now I'm saying that. Someone actually called me out on this. He says, Brian, you do understand when you're saying things like, oh, that's quite pleasant. You've been drinking smoky whiskey for a long time. A lot of people will get this and they'll understand why we call it a monster of a dram.
Yeah. Now, so like
It's lovely.
before we wrap out, there's two things. One, like somebody did ask in the chat, does Ardbeg produce any either very low peated or unpeated whiskeys at all?
So in some of those times that happened at the start, before Glenmorangie took over, we did find that companies before, like sometimes in the 70s especially, they actually started to experiment at Ardbeg to make unpeated whiskey. Now, it came under a code name, the cask themselves, called Cold Dalton. And we actually released some of that whiskey under the name Blasta, so Blasda. And that was a special edition, a one-off special edition. And it's not completely unpeated. That's actually very, very, very rare in Scotch whiskey because you sometimes get some phenolic parts per million. And we say this is around about 8. Now, realistically, when you're going through the whiskey making process, you lose ppm all the time. So that is what a lot of people would say was unpeated Ardbeg. Now, since then, we've not done that. It's one of these ones that when we released it, we didn't really know if people would like it or not. And we released it. And initially, because it was Ardbeg fans like that, where's the peat? And
of course.
So what we did, do I have one here? I do. Okay. So to kind of go away from it, Dr. Bill Lumsden actually says, well, not everyone in the Ardbeg fans were actually happy that we'd done an unpeated Ardbeg. So we released this whiskey, which is called Ardbeg Supernova. And Ardbeg Supernova is the highest ppm that Ardbeg's done. This is well over 100 ppm. So we've done both sides of it.
So for those, so ppm is you said parts per million, but is because I had someone explain it to me. Is that kind of like the peated scale?
Yeah. There's a lot more variables with it, but yeah, if you think about when the barley is drying, the peat is added to the fire underneath. Now, the peat itself, as it's there, it's not necessarily drying the barley above that. The barley itself is drying independently, but what happens underneath is the smoke comes up and it kind of wraps itself around the barley. And when it comes to the malting facilities, they themselves will measure that batch, and it's the phenolic parts per million. They will look at their customers, and then they'll see, well, a distillery such as Bowmore, for example, they've got a spec around about 25 ppm, so that will go to them. Kalila and Lagavulin run at 35 ppm. And it kind of varies between the distilleries. Pretty much, we've got an agreement with the malting facility that we use, Port Ellen Maltings, and anything over 55 we take, and we figure it out later.
Just anything above that, just give it to us. Yeah. Just give it to us. I love it. So there you go. So the two we've had tonight, what are those average around? Are those around that 50, 55 ppm?
Yep. So the spirit going inside, we'll probably say that the average is out to 55 or 60 in terms of the spirit. But when it comes to the whiskey making process, every step of it, you're going to be losing ppm. And one of the things that will lose quite dramatically is going to be maturation. So if you've got a younger whiskey, which is peated, and an older whiskey that is peated, if they were left in exactly the same type of cask in the same conditions, generally speaking, the younger one would be a smokier whiskey than the older one. Those phenolic flavors are some of the first to go in there. But I say this generally speaking because the Ardbeg 5 years old kind of turns everything on its head somewhere.
Yeah, right? No kidding. That's fantastic.
You think you know, and then all of a sudden, like something like this comes out, and like, you have to start rethinking.
I will say that almost more than, and I mean, again, it could be due to just literally hundreds of more years of history and everything, but I get more surprised by Scotch whiskeys than I do almost any other kind of variant of spirit and everything like that. Just the whether it's peat or the type of cask they're aging in, and the process of which it's distilled, and all that. There's so many factors that can produce so many different types of different products that are all technically Scotch whiskey or whatever it happens to be. But surprising and fascinating are two of the probably most apropos words for Scotch in general, but certainly for Ardbeg. And it's one of those things that I will tell people right now: if you are afraid of the peat or whatever, like that kind of a thing, do yourself a favor and try it. Give it a go, because it is absolutely fascinating. And I think you're going to find something that you never expected before, especially in products like Ardbeg here.
Yeah, for sure. And also as well, that I think I myself say it all the time when it comes to me doing presentations. I'm quite happy that people do this, but if you don't have to ask people if they like Ardbeg, you can see it on their face.
I bet you've seen a lot of faces.
I have.
A lot of reactions.
Some of them, you can just totally tell these like Ardbeg fanatics we have, and as soon as they get something they like, it's like, oh, okay, I put you in a good spot here. You're in a happy place. I'm just going to leave you be. I don't have to talk anymore. I'll leave you to it.
So, I'm not going to say I'm a marketing genius, but I'm just saying you should take this back to corporate and tell them like if what you're telling me is true, is like then that's one of the things you can see it on someone's face. You guys should have somebody develop Ardbeg emojis.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Whether it's the person like, oh, the smoke or whatever, or it's like, ooh, that's good. I'm just saying it's an idea. You know, other people could do it, but I'm here giving it to you. Give me Ardbeg emojis for the next Ardbeg day. That's all I'm asking.
100% you're going to get credit for that as well.
Yes.
My colleague in America, Cameron, who's a fantastic person, you're going to be aiming for his job soon.
Yeah. Hey, I'm warm. I'm just getting warmed up too. That's the crazy thing. Well, Bry, this has been awesome. I literally just got done saying it. It's fascinating. It's interesting. It's something. And again, I've been trying to put myself into like peated scotches and everything, but to take the time to sit here with someone as knowledgeable as you and sip through these, it just, again, it further opens my mind and really, really pushes me out there to go, holy crap, like keep your mind open and try these things, because it's so fascinating and there's so much to think about. There's so much to taste. And I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your expertise and your knowledge. And I know several people have mentioned it in the chat. They appreciate the storytelling and just the base of knowledge and everything that you bring to the brand and everything like that. So thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you. Obviously, like, it's really nice to have a normal conversation with you. It seems like we're just having a conversation in the public usual, but this is a real honor. It really is. And hats off to you. I think you've got an amazing thing you've created here with Wrestling with Whiskey, and long may it continue as well. I will say as well, this is the first time I've actually been on YouTube, and for a lot of the people there who may not necessarily know what the hell I'm saying because of this, I can't wait. I can't wait to see what the computer-generated subtitles give when I'm actually talking.
Well, luckily, I've been typing them out the whole time. I got you covered.
Yeah, that's all right. Okay. And also as well, I'll do a quick plug just before.
Please, yes.
If anyone does want to find out more information, we do have some fantastic Instagram accounts to follow. There is at Ardbeg and then at Ardbeg USA. If you want to reach out to me personally, we are quite open, very open at Ardbeg. So if there's anything you do want to know about Ardbeg, and also look after Glenmorangie as well, and it's at Whisky Bryan if you need any questions.
Yes, but he's awesome. He's always very responsive and everything like that. That's actually how we first got in contact, was through, I believe, through Instagram or something like that. So yeah, no, Whisky Bryan. Remember, that's whiskey without an E. You damn Yankees! All right, throw that E out of there. So yeah, Whisky Bryan on Instagram. Check him out. Check out Ardbeg USA for sure. Once again, Bryan, thank you very much. If you do me a favor, stay on the line. I'm going to kind of wrap up the show and I'll be back with you. But once again, appreciate your time, appreciate your insight, and thank you very much.
Cheers, Matt. All the best, everyone.
Cheers, buddy. All right. Well, everybody, that was a fascinating episode. Like, seriously, thank you guys who were in the chat. This was one of our more attended episodes in recent memory. You guys are awesome. Thank you for stopping by, whether you've watched this live or you're watching this later on demand on the YouTube channel. I appreciate you guys. Please, yes, again, follow Ardbeg, follow Bryan on social media. They are all fantastic people and everything like that. But whiskey folks, once again, it is time to wrap up. I appreciate all the folks in the chat. Thank you guys for coming out live. Please make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment. Hit those little alert buttons. That is something I didn't know about for the longest time. Hit that little bell for the alert buttons. You will know every time that Wrestling with Whiskey goes live. For Wrestling with Whiskey Weekly, the longest, dumbest name in YouTube shows. Too many W's. But you guys are what make it happen. There's a lot of cool stuff coming up. We just finished up a really cool interview with Rabbit Hole. We've got some more coming down the pipe. Many of them will be live here on YouTube. Some of them will be taped and put up in videos later. But you guys are in for a lot of really, really cool treats in the whiskey world. And I will make sure, pandemic be damned, I'm going to bring you the best and most fun whiskey knowledge and interviews and content you've got going. So tell your friends, baby. And if you haven't joined the Wrestling with Whiskey Single Barrel Club, we've got some awesome stuff coming up as well, including our first pick is about to hit the shelf, baby. So that's patreon.com/wrestling with whiskey. I will be picking out barrels with my lovely, lovely patrons, and you can join in too. So patreon.com/wrestling with whiskey. Until next week, you guys, always be trying new things. Always jump across the oceans, jump across continents. Expand your palate, your nose, your world of whiskey beyond anything, beyond your comfort zone. And you will find some fascinating things. Thank you, everybody. And have a good night. And always be wrestling with whiskey.